Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson is an epic heroic fantasy novel from 2009. It's about 650 pages, and while it hits all the bases of a standard satisfying fantasy story in an original fantasy world, the most unique aspects are, as you've probably heard before, the magic systems in action. I was constantly perplexed at the reality of seeing a fictional set of scientific laws that are somehow so easy to visualize. How can someone conceive and execute something so well? While, from initial reading passages of somewhat dry areas filled with sometimes meaningless dialogue and courtroom drama type dialogue and filler, it sometimes felt like you're reading an outline or an encyclopedia. It all sort of simultaneously is a positive aspect because it has that sort of slow burn, slow building up to quality like suspense and then the finish of getting to action, which to me was the highlight of the book, despite the sort of satisfying character arc that's typical of Brandon Sanderson and some other heroic fantasy works. Seeing those magic systems in action, it all becomes a truly magical experience itself that defies all description, that begs the question or draws the argument that is there some link between creativity, visualizing the works of an author, and some other energy source from some other dimensions working through them to us across time and space. These are the sorts of things you'll seriously contemplate for the fact that conceptualizing the ideas of how energy works and could work if certain properties and laws were different, if there was some sort of divine intervention endowing humans with given powers to influence those things, what it would look like and how it would look like. How can someone possibly conceive of that? That is one of the coolest things ever. To get more specific, endowing inanimate objects with a sort of intelligence that has to do with light and color, and there's being some sort of link there, isn't something that you can use measurable understandings of systems like mathematical or logic to totally understand. It begs the question that even types of intelligence within our greater subconscious most likely have a sort of link between emotional knowledge, logical knowledge, and a sort of spiritual knowledge that also makes a sort of argument for creation or creationism in a way. So, if there was a sequel to Warbreaker, I'd definitely like to see more of that. A truly eye-opening, extraordinary, visual, epic experience, and as usual, characters are likable, if not a bit bland, I'll be honest. And it's not the most exciting Brandon Sanderson book. Now, at this point, I've read the first Mistborn trilogy, the fourth Mistborn novel of the second trilogy, Elantris, and the first two Stormlight Archive books. And although I would say this is probably the weakest of all those books, it's still a 9 out of 10 highly recommend experience and a good way to be introduced to his universe of the Cosmere, of which this book is connected. Sorry about that. And because it is a more self-contained and therefore more satisfying story, although I said it sometimes it feels like you're reading a dry encyclopedia because there's a lot of info dumping and stuff. If you're interested in that sort of thing, that's going to be a selling point to you. If you're not and you want a more immediate, like action heavy or drama heavy or character study type fantasy, you're not quite kind of get that. There's a little bit of that there, but it really depends on the type of reader you are. But don't go and expecting a story that's just constant action in this one. Action is scarce, but it's more earned, and so the emotional payoff that it's connected to, the sort of Deus Ex Machina moments, are more valuable, therefore. But somehow, this story, it just has it's sort of permeated with an omnipresent sense of hope and themes involving duty and altruism on behalf of one's kingdom, the main characters being princesses and also significant political figures as well for representatives of their lands, basically acting as spies on behalf of the welfare of their empire between two nations which are in conflict, which has a sort of fantastorical quality as well that I think is eternally relevant and worthy of study and interesting enough. And from that point on, a lot of it is not totally believable, but made believable enough because of the weightier aspects of the believable parts that sort of culminate in making it altogether a definitely an escape. Definitely a escape of just heroic fantasy. I mean, it's a relatively fast read, but it's not the most exciting Brandon Sanderson novel I've read. It definitely takes patience. So, if you like fantasy, if you like heroic fantasy, and you also like world building and original magic systems in which there's a lot of power and more interesting in how that power is used, the link between power and morality, if you can imagine such a thing, and the proper use of morality and the idea of creationism, universal truths, and greater intelligences that may or may not exist in other dimensions, linking with this one, in alignment with the proper use of that power, then this is, I can't think of a better book to recommend. I had a blast reading this. It was totally fun. The world was cool, and my personal favorite moments are visualizing that world in action. A little bit of the wit of the character Light Song, who's just kind of enjoyable in his ending arc, as well as Vasher, as well as both the princess main characters, Vivina and Siri, and basically the scene where a certain interlooper character is telling the backstory of Tetelier. That was really cool. I would like to see, if I were to see a sequel to Warbreaker, I would definitely like to see greater cataclysmic use of that magic system, as if there was some sort of apocalyptic rift or destruction of the core operating system in what other dimensions that use of that energy is connected to. I don't care what ethical stakes are tampered with to see that in action, because sometimes I just like being a fantasy action junkie and visualizing that sort of thing. So altogether, it's just a fun, inspiring fantasy novel. It takes a minute to read. It's not going to hold the attention span of everyone, because it definitely, there's long passages where not a lot's going on, but at the same time, paradoxically, depending on what type of reader you are, that might be a benefit to you if you like that sort of slow build up and then ultimate crescendo, as if it were in like an orchestra, to make a finer sort of fantasy adventure experience that only novels can really do. Although this would have also made a really awesome movie, especially on the visual level, I will say. So this would be a great introduction into the Cosmere universe by Brandon Sanderson. I loved it. Personally, I will say one more thing. At this concerning value, how I define value on a moral level in terms of stories being inspiring, as well as the brainier aspects of stories that cause you to stretch your mind a little and then visualize better for ultimate better payoff, and contemplating how energy works and there being some potential alignment between that and moral truth. I don't think there is a more well-rounded, better living present fantasy author on the face of the planet. If I had to choose the most generally worthwhile fantasy author with the most talent that has the most inspiring fiction on the market right now, it would be Brandon Sanderson. And that's me comparing to a lot of other fantasy authors I've read to this point. I'm fairly certain that if there was a fantasy author to compare to his works for commercial audiences mostly, but just about anyone, I would have heard of him by now, or her by now. So basically, yes, 10 out of 10 or 9.5 out of 10. It's not totally perfect, but most people will probably gonna enjoy this if they enjoy fantasy, especially if you want something a little more inspiring. It's a good break from a lot of the sort of grimdark popular fantasy that's available out there. That's become kind of redundant, cliche, whatever. So, yeah, Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson. Definitely read it. It's great.